How the Iran war will explode the cost of living. Most people think wars happen far away, in places they will never visit, between people they will never meet. And because of that, they believe war has nothing to do with their daily life. But this war is different. You may never see the battlefield. You may never hear the explosions, but you are going to pay for this war, not with a uniform, not with a weapon, but with your money. You will see it when you fill your car with fuel. You will see it when you buy groceries. You will see it when you pay your electricity bill. You will see it when your rent goes up. You will see it when interest rates stay high and loans become more expensive. This is how modern wars work. They don't just destroy cities. They destroy supply chains. They don't just move armies. They move prices. Because the modern world runs on energy. And this war is happening in one of the most important energy regions on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. Why this war matters. Most people have never heard of the Strait of Hormuz. It is just a narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. But this small piece of water controls a huge part of the global economy. Every day, massive oil tankers pass through this route carrying oil and gas to the rest of the world. If something happens here, the entire world feels it. The biggest risk of this war is not just fighting on land. The biggest risk is oil shipments being disrupted. If shipping becomes dangerous, insurance costs rise. If insurance costs rise, oil becomes more expensive to transport. If oil becomes expensive, everything becomes expensive. The global economy runs on fuel. Oil is that fuel, and this route is one of the main pipelines of the world. Because in the oil market, fear alone can raise prices. And once oil prices start rising, the chain reaction begins. Transportation becomes more expensive. Shipping becomes more expensive. Factories become more expensive to run. Food becomes more expensive to produce. Electricity becomes more expensive to generate. If energy becomes expensive, life becomes expensive. Oil prices, the inflation chain reaction. Oil is where the real story begins. Most people think oil only matters when petrol prices go up. But oil is not just fuel for cars. Oil is the fuel for the entire global economy. Your food came on a truck. Your phone came on a ship. Your clothes came in a container. Everything you buy was transported. So when oil prices rise, transportation becomes expensive. When transportation becomes expensive, companies raise prices. When companies raise prices, the cost of living rises. But oil affects more than transportation. Oil is used to make plastic. Plastic is used for packaging. Oil is used in chemicals, fertilizers, manufacturing, construction, and clothing materials. This means when oil prices rise, production costs rise. And when production costs rise, product prices rise. And almost everything you buy is transported. And this is exactly why wars in the Middle East are so important for the global economy. Because a large portion of the world's oil passes through that region. If there is conflict, supply becomes uncertain. Oil is like the first domino. When oil prices rise, inflation usually follows. War affects oil. Oil affects transportation. Transportation affects everything. And everything affects the cost of living. Why food prices will rise after oil prices rise. Food prices usually rise next. Modern food production depends on fuel, fertilizer, transportation, packaging, and electricity. If one part becomes expensive, the entire food system becomes expensive. To understand why this happens, you need to understand how modern food is produced. To understand why this happens, you need to understand how modern food is produced. Food does not just grow on farms and magically appear in supermarkets. Food is part of a massive global system that depends on fuel, fertilizer, transportation, packaging, refrigeration, and international trade. Tractors use diesel. Transport trucks use diesel. Food travels long distances before reaching stores. Packaging is made from plastic, which comes from oil. This is why food inflation usually follows energy inflation. Wars are not only seen in news headlines. They are seen in supermarkets and grocery stores. Slowly, quietly, food prices start rising, not through headlines, but through the price of bread, rice, vegetables, milk, and cooking oil. So when people talk about war, they usually talk about politics, weapons, and armies. But one of the biggest impacts of war happens quietly in supermarkets, grocery stores, and local. Prices slowly start rising. Prices slowly start rising. First a little, then more. Then suddenly people realize that their monthly grocery bill is much higher than before. Energy bills and electricity will rise. Most people think oil prices only matter when they go to the gas station. They think if they don't drive much, oil prices don't really affect them. But that is not how the modern world works. Oil and gas are not just used for cars. They are used to produce electricity, heat homes, run factories, and transport goods. When energy becomes expensive, electricity becomes expensive. When electricity becomes expensive, factories become expensive to operate. When factories become expensive, products become expensive. And when products become expensive, the cost of living rises. Energy also affects housing. When energy and construction costs rise, building houses becomes more expensive. When building houses becomes expensive, fewer houses are built. When fewer houses are built, rent goes up. So a war that raises oil prices can indirectly increase your rent. This is why economists always watch oil and gas prices during wars, because they know energy prices are usually the first step in a much bigger cost of living increase. Energy is the foundation of the economy. Everything sits on top of it. When energy becomes expensive, life becomes expensive. And that is how a war thousands of miles away can slowly make your daily life more expensive without you even realizing why. The 1970s energy crisis comparison. This has happened before. In the 1970s, oil supplies were restricted and prices exploded. Something strange happened to the global economy. Prices rose very fast, but economies stopped growing. Jobs became harder to find, businesses slowed down, and people felt poorer every year. This situation was called stagflation. Stagnation plus inflation. High prices and slow economic growth at the same time. The situation today has very similar ingredients. Conflict in an oil region, rising oil prices, rising energy prices, rising food prices, inflation pressure. The situation we are seeing now has very similar ingredients. A major conflict in an oil-producing region, rising oil prices, rising energy prices, rising food prices, inflation pressure, and central banks already worried about inflation. If oil prices rise sharply again, the world could face a similar situation. High inflation, slow economic growth, expensive loans, and a higher cost of living that lasts for years. You may never see the battlefield, but the battlefield will slowly show up in your bank account. If the war continues, worst-case scenario, now we need to talk about something that most people don't want to think about. What happens if this war does not end quickly? The real economic damage of wars usually happens when wars drag on. If this war continues, the first thing that could happen is a major oil shock. If oil supply falls, prices don't slowly increase, they jump. Fuel prices rise first, then transportation, then food prices, then electricity, then airline tickets, then shipping costs, then the price of almost everything. This is how inflation spreads through an economy. Higher oil prices can also slow the economy and even cause recessions. Governments spend more during wars, borrow more money, and debt increases. And when debt increases, taxes usually increase later. So the cost of war does not only appear today in fuel and food prices. Sometimes the cost appears years later in the form of higher taxes and fewer government services. If this war continues for a long time, the worst-case scenario looks like this. Higher oil prices, higher food prices, higher electricity bills, higher interest rates, slower economic growth, more government debt, higher taxes, lower standard of living. These things do not happen overnight. They happen slowly, month by month, bill by bill, until one day people realize everything has become expensive. The real cost of war ending. When people think about war, they imagine tanks, missiles, and soldiers. They imagine battles happening far away. But the real cost of war is almost never paid on the battlefield. The real cost of war is paid at home. It is paid at the gas station. It is paid in electricity bills. It is paid in grocery stores. It is paid through higher interest rates and higher rent. Wars do not just destroy cities. They destroy purchasing power. They destroy savings. They destroy living standards. Modern wars are economic events as much as military events. A war that started thousands of kilometers away slowly enters your life through prices, bills, and interest rates. This is how modern wars spread across the world. Not through soldiers, but through inflation. The bombs may fall in one country, but the prices rise in every country.